Hello and welcome to the Rotoworld Fantasy Baseball Mock Draft 2026. Back again here with James Schiano. James and I co-host the Fantasy Baseball Q&A. Those will be operating maybe even starting next week. We'll get you guys a firm date on that. And then back in the saddle, old friend, podcast partner, Scott Pianowski. Scott, it's great to have you back.
It's great to be back, have the band back together. I always love doing stuff with Rotoworld. And, man, the baseball season, we're all jacked, right? I mean, the World Baseball Classic was fantastic. The regular season isn't far off. We're all drafting pretty much every day now, live draft, slow draft, and today a mock draft. So I can't wait to talk baseball and share some strategies with you guys.
Yeah, this is going to be a fun one. Just so everybody knows, the draft is starting in just over 2 minutes. We had it paused a little bit so we could get you in here. So I will just explain everything real quick. This is a 12-team Roto League mock draft, standard 5x5 Roto categories. The build here is similar to what you'll see in a lot of leagues. 1 catcher, 4 outfield spots. We do have a corner infield, and a middle infield spot. And then there are 9 pitcher spots. We will not be drafting benches in this mock draft. So everybody's just going to fill out a starting lineup, and then we're going to go through it. Bunch of guys from Rotoworld here: James Schiano, DJ Short, George Bissell, Jorge Montanez, Nick Shlain, Dave Shovein. We got Scott here. We got Chris Towers from CBS. We've got Rick Graham from Pitcher List. So a really good group here. We're going to go, try and as much as possible go pick by pick. And then we are going to look at some teams and some overall draft strategies and how people kind of, executed what they had hoped to execute, during the draft. And so we've got 1 minute and 13 seconds here because I had to set it either for a 1 minute pause or a 5 minute pause. I'm going first, and so I'll just talk through my pick before it happens. We are drafting on Yahoo. So obviously Yahoo here separates Shohei Ohtani, the batter, and Shohei Ohtani, the pitcher. So you're not getting both. However, with the first pick here, I am still going with Shohei Ohtani. Not a surprise, and not just because Aaron Judge struck out in crucial situations during the World Baseball Classic. I think the stolen base difference here is important to me. I think you're getting really good power. You're getting really good batting average from both of these guys. They're both in good lineups. You're getting run production. You're getting homers. You're getting RBIs. But with Shohei Ohtani, you're getting most likely 25 plus stolen bases. And I don't think you're getting that with Aaron Judge. And I just think if I have the opportunity, I know that Shohei has to be in my util spot. And I understand that people really don't like doing that. With guys that are as good as Shohei Ohtani, I am less inclined to deviate from, or to avoid doing that. So I'm going to take Ohtani, get true 5 category production, and I'm going to feel really good about it.
I think that's fair.
And so now we're off. Would you guys have done anything different?
I might be considering Judge in some drafts the first pick this year, especially without the addition of pitching. Even though if you're playing a standard weekly league, you're very rarely going to use Ohtani a pitcher because he's rarely going to get 2 start weeks and he's just too good of a hitter. I think that if Judge actually, because we have a few years now of sustaining batting title type batting average, that could be a true anchor, an additional category on top of the home runs and the RBIs. I think that makes the decision much more difficult at pick number 1 this year.
Scott, we went Ohtani, Judge, Witt here. It seems like Ohtani, Judge, Witt is where we're going everywhere. Do you see anybody who enters that top 3, or is that where you're at?
I think you could consider Juan Soto with the 3rd pick. He slides to 5 here, but to me, Ohtani, Judge, Witt, and Soto has been the top 4. The first 2 in either order, the second 2 in either order. And if I were drafting first multiple times, I would probably split my vote between Ohtani and Judge just to diversify. Ohtani is a utility player when he hits, but he also has to pitch. I wonder if that brings in a little bit more risk to the equation. We know the Dodgers, more than any other team, will act like they're already in the playoffs when the baseball season starts. So if there are any hiccups with anybody physically speaking, and there's a lot of players in that lineup who are over 30, I think they might pull back from some guys. But it's not a slam dunk to me either way, 1 or 2. It's not a slam dunk to me either at 3 or 4. And as I consider my pick at 7, interesting, Tariq Skubal goes 4th in this draft. I feel like premier starting pitching has been pushed up this year. Do you guys feel You weren't going to take a pitcher at 1. I don't know what James is going to do at 12, but do you feel like a first-round pitcher makes sense in 2026?
Yeah, James, I was curious about that while Scott's picking. Skubal 4, that's where he ranks in a lot of projections. Would you take him that high? Are you going to take a guy? Would you, if you're picking in the middle of the first round, take one of these starters?
I think not. I would have to wait for the top 4 hitters to go off the board to start considering. And I even think Ronald Acuna gets very close to that mix just because of how good the batted ball quality was last year when he came back off the second ACL tear. But once you get through 5 or 6 hitters, I think it makes some sense because as there are in most years, there's a large flattening once you get around the top 15-ish pitchers. And there's just so much risk and reward as you go down that entire board. And there's even tons of risk. I think we've talked about it a little bit too, between like the 6th and like the 10th pitcher anyway. It's kind of a chaos grouping where these top 3 are so relatively strong compared to years past that getting one early, which I would like to get one of them at one of my spots on the wheel right here, and then just forgetting for a while.
Yeah, I will say, Scott, we'll chat and let James think about his picks coming up at the turn. I personally would take Soto and Acuna above Skubal. I'd probably take Jose Ramirez above Skubal. That's just my preference to make sure I get a really good 5-category contributor at the top because I feel good about my starting pitching later. James is almost up here, or he is up. We'll talk about his picks when he's done. You went Elly De La Cruz at 7, then Paul Skeens went at 8, Jose Ramirez at 9, Julio Rodriguez at 10, Kyle Tucker at 11. Scott, just with Elly at 7, any concerns with the real struggles in the second half? His pull fly ball rate was really bad. He had like 1 homer for an extended stretch. We know his raw talent is really good, but does that second half worry you at all with somebody you have to take in the first round?
I'm just looking at it as an arbitrary endpoint where I think he got a little bit long with his swing, something he can certainly tidy up. I like that Elly is no longer the batting average risk player that we viewed him as maybe a couple of years ago. And, Fred Zinke, my colleague at Yahoo, and I are getting killed because we are soft fading Jose Ramirez. Not a hard fade. He's a first round pick. I could have taken him with the 7th pick. I just don't like the Cleveland supporting cast. And I wonder, I know Ramirez has run at an increased rate the last 2 years, but he's in his mid-30s now. I wonder if he loses some of that. And I feel like your first round pick should excite you, the ballpark, the lineup. And I just don't have that vibe with Ramirez. So I want to take a player on like Elly, who's on the escalator. We haven't seen his best season yet. That's why I went that way. But I understand a lot. The Ramirez public has been all over Fred and I, and we've been taking some shots the last couple of weeks.
Fairly.
James, talk about your spot. So you were able to get one of your pitchers. You got Garrett Crochet at 12, and then Corbin Carroll on the turn. So talk through, whether you think Crochet is any real difference from Skeens, and then Corbin Carroll, obviously coming off the hamate injury, you don't seem overly concerned about it based on where you drafted him.
No, to start with Carroll, I was just really encouraged that he was already playing in a spring game as of a full week ago at this point, and his first spring at bat, and maybe it was the second, he hit a ground ball almost 114 miles per hour. We know there's been some rumors over the years of the guns being a little bit hot over in the Arizona spring training, but seeing him put literally 1 batted ball in play, hit that hard, gives me a lot of confidence to take a guy who should be kind of a slam dunk first round talent in terms of power and speed, just fell a little bit because of the injury. And like we said with Crochet, those 3 pitches at the top seem very flat to me. I think that Crochet is just the big thing that kills him compared to the other 2 guys is the ballpark and the division that he plays in. But on top of that, I think he'll have better defense behind him, and he could have easily the most strikeouts out of the 3 of them. So I don't see enough of a difference between Skeens, Skubal, and Crochet for that big of a difference in their ADP. It's a relatively big difference, like 5 or 6 picks. But to get one of those guys now, I'm excited to not take a pitcher for like a half hour here and then have my one outfielder who I think can steady me up with power and speed at the top.
So people say defense doesn't matter in fantasy, right? And I guess largely it doesn't. But when you take Garrett Crochet, you are having daydreams about how great that outfield defense is. When you draft a Milwaukee pitcher, a Chicago Cubs pitcher, these are guys who are in front of teams that have defensive plus players all over the diamond. So I want you to identify maybe the 5 or 6 best defensive teams when you draft, and those are the pitchers that you want to locate those guys and try to draft into those pitching staffs.
Yeah, I really like what you guys are saying there. I think the Corbin Carroll thing makes some sense. You can make an argument maybe you take Tatis over him because he's healthy right now, and there is that a little bit of that power speed upside. But I wouldn't have moved Carroll down any farther than that. I feel like that's kind of the range that he should be going in. There may be a little bit of a power decline coming off the hamate, but it shouldn't impact the batting average. It shouldn't impact the stolen bases, obviously the run totals, all of that kind of stuff is going to get you tons of value. I am up here on the turn, and I'm staring at Jazz Chisholm, who I tend to not love to draft because there's volatility there, but second base is just a nightmare. I get tons of stolen bases out of Jazz, and then here's what I am leaning towards. So I have Jazz, Trey Turner, and Francisco Lindor as my three guys who I feel, were ranked here coming up. I'm going to take Jazz. Now I'm looking at Jazz is a little bit of a batting average risk. I have good speed with Jazz. I have pretty good speed with Ohtani. So stolen bases aren't crucial to me. I have a lot of power with Ohtani, and I have pretty good power with Jazz. So I think what matters to me here is the batting average floor of Trey Turner, which I think is a little bit higher than the batting average floor of Francisco Lindor, especially then with Lindor also coming off the hamate injury. So even though I like Lindor, I'm going to take Trey Turner here. I think it just pairs better with my Jazz Chisholm and Shohei Ohtani first two picks. And even though Neto is technically ahead here by Yahoo rank, I've seen Trey Turner and Francisco Lindor do this for too long to take Zach Neto over them, especially with Neto. I don't think the injury right now is an issue, right? The injury to Neto's wrist, but we've seen him be banged up in the past. And the fact that he had an injury scare in spring training is just a little bit of a note that he's not also a guaranteed lock for innings.
You mentioned that second base is kind of ugly this year. Also, third base is ugly, and Chisholm qualifies at both second base and third base. He may percolate to third base for you either in this mock or during the season. So I like to, whenever I can pick up a flexible player like that, especially at a spot that might be difficult to fill in an optimal way, I think that probably gives him an extra 4 or 5 slots of value at this part of the draft.
I agree with that. James, I want to ask you a question. One catcher league.
Yeah.
Rick Graham took Cal Raleigh with the 20th overall pick. Now, if you input projections into any sort of sheet, if you do an auction calculator on Fangraphs, if you use Tanner Bell's SGP sheet, if you do all of that, even as a one catcher league, it will tell you that this is where Cal Raleigh should go because his offensive production is tremendous. He gets in the game even when he's not catching because he DHs. But would you take a catcher this early in a one catcher league?
Personally, I wouldn't, and that was a big reason why I didn't get to reap any Cal Raleigh rewards last year. That's why I think I touted Cal Raleigh possibly being a sell high as early as May, and then you would have missed out on 4 of these 3 home runs the rest of the season from that point on. But there's just always going to be so much more of a risk factor in terms of all offensive players for catchers. Raleigh does mitigate a lot of those by DHing a lot, and he'll probably DH 40 or 50 games this year, similar to what he did last year. So less time behind the plate, less time for injury, less wear and tear in those legs. But Cal Raleigh probably still needs a 45-ish homer projection with an acceptable batting average and 210 combined runs and RBIs to make that draft cost worth it. And I still think he probably comes in a little bit lower than that, especially just after everything that happened last year.
If you only need to fill one, look at how good. You ask yourself, who is the number 10 catcher, the number 12 catcher? You might get Agustin Ramirez. You might get JT Realmuto or Adley Rutschman. You believe in those guys coming back. You might get Salvador Perez. The last team to take a catcher in this league is still going to like their catcher.
Yeah, that always kind of pushes the catchers down the board a little bit. Oh, I'm on the clock now, so I'll talk through some of my
I'll just
picks
jump
here.
in while James is picking, and we'll share your thoughts afterwards. I do agree on that. I think that there is. I was in a home league draft last night. It's a one catcher league, and I was like, man, there's a lot of. I want to take Shea Langoliers here. I want to take William Contreras. Where they go. It seems like there's a value, but then you just look at the difference in what you're getting. I don't know that there's a huge difference between Shea Langoliers and I was gonna Francisco Alvarez is the first name that popped in my head, but there might be a difference. But like Drake Baldwin goes much later. If you're in a one catcher league, if you're in a Yahoo league too, like Ivan Herrera is somebody who like is going to get catcher eligibility far sooner than some other spots. Salvador Perez goes really late in one catcher league drafts based on the production or compared to the production that he has. So I still think that waiting is the appropriate strategy. James, you got Rooker here. And then Matt Olson.
Mm-hmm.
That's a lot of power. How do you feel they match up with your Corbin Carroll and Garrett Crochet? Are you worried about speed at all?
I'm happy that Corbin Carroll could give me a nice blanket of speed. I really considered Wyatt Langford instead of Rooker, but similarly to what we were talking about before with getting pitchers, getting shares of good defenses, I like getting shares of the lineups. I think will be some of the best in the league, and that Oakland A's lineup in that ballpark looks amazing. But these are the sliding scales that we play in our drafts. I think now, even looking back among my first 3 picks, I might have slightly preferred possibly a Vladimir Guerrero with that first pick, and then maybe getting myself a Wyatt Langford now. I thought about Edwin Diaz briefly there. George just took him a few picks after me, but it's just kind of playing the game. I think there's a little bit more speed I'm happy with in the middle rounds here, especially as my middle infield is still open, and I still have 2 more outfield spots open to play around with. But we're gonna have to now. Speed's going to have to be a focus as we move down the board.
Yeah, and I think you can get speed. I have found at least that I think you can get speed later in drafts than power. So I think loading up on power early on makes some sense.
Agreed.
Scott, in the 3rd round, you went with Manny Machado, who just boring, but totally always productive. And you mentioned third base was a shallow position. And then you went with Hunter Brown here. We're starting to get some starting pitchers off the board. Talk to me just about the boring but good production from Machado, and then how you feel about Hunter Brown as your ace. Are you happy that he's your ace, or did you feel like he was the guy on the board and it was good enough and I'm fine with it?
Yeah, I thought he was the last acceptable frontman SP1 that if I was going to go to kind of an anchor away or a hero or SP build, I want to have somebody who can strike out 200 guys, could win a Cy Young award. I think Brown has a type of upside since he kind of retooled who he was 2 years ago. And I like how this draft has started for me. I took Kyle Schwarber. We don't need to talk about him much, but in the 2nd round, who I think is a perfect 2nd round pick. He's no longer a batting average drain, and he gets so much volume at the top of a Philadelphia lineup. He might even steal some bases. I don't know that I want to count on him stealing 10 bases again, but he at least has shown some willingness to do that. But 100 runs scored, 100 RBIs, 40 home runs, those feel like numbers you can bank in right now. And Machado, just the classic boring pick. He's on a Hall of Fame trajectory. His stats, his production, his level of productivity has really held up nicely into his 30s. It's a decent Padres lineup. That park isn't as prohibitively pitcher friendly as it used to be. So I like to check off third base. I like to get somebody, again, nobody's going to the draft and trying to elbow you out of the way for Machado anymore, because he's no longer like the MVP candidate. But I think he's a really good 3rd round target. And I think Hunter Brown, the 4th round, makes a lot of sense too. So I'm not Ellie. I wasn't sure that I loved Ellie in round 1, but I feel really good about my last 3 picks.
Yeah, I agree with you on sometimes you don't need to make the splash pick. And Hunter Brown is not Hunter Brown. Manny Machado is not a splash pick. But I think that's a really solid pick always. I finally made my first starting pitcher pick in the first pick of the 5th round. It was Cole Reagans. Cole Reagans and George Kirby were on the board. I will say that I had been hoping that Fried had fallen. Fried tends to fall into that range in a 12-team league. He went just a few picks before me to Rick Graham. Cole Reagans and Kirby are guys who I have a lot as my aces utilizing this strategy, and I feel okay about those guys as aces. I will get a second starting pitcher, to help support it, because I don't have a Crochet or a Skeens or whatever. But Reagans, when he's healthy, has tremendous upside. He racked up a ton of Ks when he came back from the groin injury last year. So I feel pretty good about his ability to really produce high-end value when he's healthy. And this would be an IL league, so I'm okay with that. And I think Kirby also, underlying metrics looked a lot better than the surface level stats last year. We knew that he was pitching through an injury at the start of the season. Right now, Kirby, I think, is a solid bet for good innings. And I think Kirby is still a fine SP1 if you do wait And then we're starting to see a lot of closers off the board. So we'll just go into round 4. We saw Edwin Diaz go off the board to George Bissell. And then we saw Cade Smith just go off the board to Jorge. And so is this the range, Scott, in a 12-team league? Are you trying to get, because you just passed on possibly another closer. Are you trying to get closers in this range? Are you happy to play in the muck this year? It seems like a very confusing year for closers.
Yeah, I feel like every year is a confusing year. I'm a little disappointed that Cade Smith has started to get priced into that first tier where he certainly belongs, because I was hoping he'd be maybe a half beat below some of these other guys. So I'm going to shop in the second tier, the third tier closers, try to get 2 guys I can hang my hat on, and then be proactive on the waiver wire with those, understanding that everybody in a competitive league is going after saves. I don't want to pretend like, I'll just get all the closers I want because nobody else is paying attention. That in a league of any consequence, that's not going to be the case. But I'm never going to be the person who taps the seal on closers. I feel like the others. Look, the bottom line is this: what comes into the league most easy, right? You talked about power being more rare than speed. You're more likely to pick up stolen bases and saves on the waiver wire than anything else that's useful. So I want that to be part of my strategy, that I'm not going to attack those things early.
I hear you. I personally like getting, like we've talked about this when we did the podcast. I like that anchor relief pitcher. I like it even more this year, where I feel like outside of like the top 8 or 9 closers, it's just totally chaos. And James, you're in a similar situation, being on an end. You did go with Johan Duran here, who I think is a solid choice. You sometimes have to set on the end. You sometimes have to set that run. You have to say, I'm going to take this guy here because by the time it gets all the way back around to me, I don't envision having a closer available. And so I want to take somebody now.
And it was kind of, again, playing this game theory with yourself where you are drafting, where on my 3rd and 4th round turn, I strongly considered Edwin Diaz and being the second team to take a closer off the board in general. I didn't do that. I saw those 2 power hitters as kind of on a different tier. And then by the time I came back around the next time, my few power options that I really wanted had flown off the board, who I thought were especially safe. So with that, I was kind of happy with my decision. I got Austin Riley, who's a target. One more chance for Austin Riley. Maybe Antoine Richardson can coax 15 steals out of him, and then take Duran, who I think to me is also still one of just the best closers out there, and sometimes doesn't exactly get viewed as such.
Let me ask you about 2 players who went in the last couple of rounds. Maikel Garcia, early round 5, Geraldo Perdomo, mid round 6. I was talking to my friend Joe Sheehan, and we identified them as maybe the 2 most improved players in baseball last year. Mm-hmm. So it makes them can be difficult to rank for fantasy purposes. I think they both went at the high end of their range here. Garcia, round 5, qualifies a ton of different positions. And Perdomo, who was 4th in the National League in MVP voting last year. How are you handling players like that who came out of nowhere to be stars?
I think with you want to see something change. And with those guys, they kind of had different things. They did very well under the hood the entire time. Both of them being a lot of plate discipline, not really swinging and missing ever. But sometimes those guys who are the experts of never swinging and missing, sometimes they swing back and forth, low push and pull in their luck radius. And I feel like last year they both swung very much to the good luck. And I don't think they'll be as bad as they were in the past, but I'm not sure if you get replications of what happened last year for either of them.
Just Perdomo hit 3 home runs 2 years ago. He hits 20 last year. You guys know I love anybody who walks more than they strike out. So the batting average is safe, and I think the stolen bases are probably safe. I just don't know if I'm getting 9 home runs. Am I getting 15 home runs? Am I getting 18 home runs? I feel like a wide range of outcomes there. And Garcia, because he qualifies all over the place in Yahoo, that's extremely valuable. But again, I don't know what we put in the home run column, because I feel like he could hit 7 home runs. He could hit 20 home runs.
Well, and also remember for Kansas City, they're moving the fences in. Yes, and again, that's not like going to give somebody a 5 to 7 homer boost, but maybe it gives somebody a 3 homer boost. I think that Maikel Garcia is just a really talented hitter, and I like that he can contribute in a lot of places, and I like that lineup. And so I'm happy where he goes. It's funny. I said that I was going to, quickly get a second pitcher. So I got Joe Ryan at the end of the 6th round. I think Cole Reagans and Joe Ryan make me feel really good at the top of my rotation, and I was able to get 4 really strong hitters to start things off. One of the downsides of taking Ohtani first and not Judge is that I come to a situation where I have no outfielders, and it's the start of the 7th round. And that's making me think a little bit differently about my Bryce Harper pick, because like Scott just took Vinny Pasquantino, who I really like, and there are first basemen available later. And I probably now would not have taken Bryce Harper and tried to take an outfielder.
Only 4 outfield fills, though.
Only 4.
I've been pleasantly surprised in drafts I've done so far that I've found when I filled my outfield up quickly, I wish I had available spots later. I thought outfield was a medium depth position when the season started, the draft season started, and I've actually warmed up to the depth of the second half of that position as I've started to draft. And with only needing 4 fills here, I actually don't think you're in a bad spot.
I think filling is different than I feel more comfortable with one guy at the top who feels safer to me.
Yeah.
I got to a point where just now, as I'm picking my outfielder, it's Randy Arozarena, O'Neal Cruz, or Michael Harris. And you're like, can I count on any of these guys?
You want a front man. I get it.
I took Arozarena because I think he's probably a little bit safer than O'Neal Cruz and Michael Harris in terms of the production that I'm getting, and really the playing time, because Cruz could still be platooned against lefties like they started to do last year, and that could have the plate appearances go down.
And Arozarena could hit 229 and you wouldn't be surprised.
Right. Having that one, guy at the top feels a little bit better to me than going through this. And we talked about, I thought I might take a closer, but before I even picked at the end of round 6, Devin Williams was gone. David Bednar was gone. And so, you are seeing people push up these closers because of the uncertainty. And I think that's something that you really need to have your own strategy going in to say, I want to get one of these guys, or I know that everybody is going to push up these closers, and I'm just going to sit it out. And
let me give you a nerdy commissioner tip here. So if you want to run a league and you don't want to have restrictions on the pitchers, right? In this league, we just have pitching spots. They're not starting pitcher spots. They're not relief pitcher spots. Even if you want to run your league that way, and Yahoo's extremely customizable, I urge you to have 1 starting pitcher spot, 1 relief pitcher spot, and then make everything else just pitcher. And the reason why is when you're doing stat queries and you just want to only look at the starting pitcher pool or the relief pitcher pool, it will allow you to do that. Like right now, I want to look at the relief pitchers, and I have to sort by saves as opposed to sorting by starting pitcher. So just a little pro tip when you're setting up your league. And again, the Yahoo is extremely customizable. You can end your league earlier than when the season ends if you want to. If September is getting you down, you can do all sorts of things with fun stats. You don't have to run 5x5, even though it's the most standard of leagues. So I hope people realize the customizability that Yahoo offers.
Yeah. James, you took one of my favorite players. I'm happy. I didn't think he'd actually make it around back to me, but if Yuri Perez is my number 2 starting pitcher 100%. In any league type, 12 team, 10 team, it doesn't matter to me. I'm super happy about it. You obviously are also fully in on Yuri Perez this year.
I'm deeply on Yuri Perez. I'm basing a lot of fantasy team strategy this year around making Yuri my SP1 in terms of very risky builds. I tried to do a similar thing last year with Brian Wu, and it worked great in my rotisserie leagues. I got killed in my head-to-head leagues because Brian Wu wasn't there for the stretch, but he's just, it seems like there's really no stopping him. I'm going to come out of the YouTube video today on my channel saying that Yuri Perez will be a top 10 pitcher in the league this year. It's just the way that all of his pitch shapes changed last year after just the Tommy John surgery. I'm sure a lot of biomechanic work, possibly some pitch design. He really didn't have the command of those secondaries, and he was still as dominant almost as he was under the hood as a rookie before the surgery. I think one more year under his belt. That's a sneaky good defense down there in Miami too. We were talking about defenses before. Probably the best park to pitch in all of baseball, if not the best park in the National League. He was almost too good for me to pass up there. If Shohei Ohtani, the pitcher, made it to me though, and I got sniped, he got taken the pick before, I would have leaned Ohtani, the pitcher, slightly over Yuri Perez. But I just, at that point, also Abrams was someone who I was targeting with the speed late build. I think he's been criminally underdrafted so far this season. I was really happy I could double tap those two right there. It really helped me tie together these first few rounds.
Second year after Tommy John surgery. We love that, right? The second year back is when you want to be in. And you mentioned the ballpark, which I think is underrated. Probably the best National League pitcher park, a Miami team that's more competitive than people realize, and that defense is good. I think Perez is a kind of a sneaky sleeper for Cy Young.
I think
Yeah,
so too.
I agree with you, Scott. I see you jumped in on the closer discussion.
Peer pressure.
Here.
Peer
Eighth
pressure.
round, Daniel Palencia. I went with the first pick in the 9th round, Ryan Helsley. I think we kind of like maybe you make a case then after this Raisel Iglesias, and then I think you've reached almost a real kind of like sharp drop point. Would you have taken Palencia this high pre-World Baseball Classic? I mean, he looked really good last year, but he also looked really good in the World Baseball Classic.
Really
and
good.
On a team like the Cubs, it's hard to not be excited about what he could do as their closer.
Yeah, with Vinny P and Palencia, obviously the WBC has become my spirit animal, and it wasn't exciting watching Venezuela finish it off. I'm just sad that tournament's over. It was so much fun, the passion, the joy. So many different countries putting together teams and the players really caring about it and getting after it. But again, I want to bankroll the Cubs. I want to bankroll their defense. They're probably going to win 90 games. I think Palencia definitely has the 9th inning to himself. So to me, 35 saves. I know he's projected here for 28. I think if he's healthy, I don't see any reason why he wouldn't get 30 plus saves and on a team that I trust. And then, maybe did I get a little bit of a boost because I just watched him, blowing away the middle of the USA lineup in the 9th inning? Yeah, it didn't hurt.
Yeah. James, let me ask you about a player who just went. So I'll just say, like, starting in round 8, we had your Yuri Perez, Corey Seager, round 8, Nick Pivetta, George Springer, Jose Altuve, pick 89 to George Bissell. Palencia went 90 to Scott. Hunter Goodman at 91, Eugenio Suarez 92, Joe Adell, Michael Harris 94, Shea Langoliers, O'Neal Cruz, Ryan Helsley, Kevin Gossman 98, Ben Rice 99, and then the player I want to ask you about, Luke Keeschel 100. Where do you stand on Luke Keeschel, James? I think he's a little bit of a lightning rod for discussion because he produced like really good numbers in stretches last year for the Twins. He also battled injury. There's not a ton of power in the bat. I think his minor league high was 15 homers. He's probably, going to hit double digits, but you might be looking at 10, 12, 13. The speed is there. The lineup is kind of average, so the counting stats may not be great. Is Luke Keeschel like a top 5 second base option for you? Where do you stand on Luke Keeschel?
I think he is kind of a fringy top 5 second base option. I think I'm personally ranked at number 6 behind Altuve, Terang, and Nico Horner, who I really hope makes it to my pick right here. But
he did. Are you up right now?
I'm one away, and I've been sniped a few times here. But Keeschel, it's more of a referendum on how poor the second base position is. I think you might have saw my very serious reaction because I wanted to make sure I got one of either Horner or Keeschel at this pick to make sure I get second base. Nice, and I got Nico Horner. That was huge for me. I can finish up my middle infield right now. But just the fact that I think Keeschel is going to run a high on base percentage, which will lead to at least, I hope, plenty of runs in a Twins lineup that isn't very good, but at least he's still at the top of it. He's just going to me be someone who's very much around the ball a lot. Hard thing to say, not really a baseball term, but he's going to steal bags, going to be on base ad nauseum. He just to me is a very, very, very fun, exciting baseball player who I want, especially because of how bad the second base position is.
Yeah, Scott, where do you stand on Keeschel? And let's just say you don't get a Jazz or a Ketel Marte at the top of the draft. Where do you think you like to kind of get into the second base conversation?
Yeah, I think Keeschel makes sense here. I just wish he had a little bit more of a track record at the major league level. He just hasn't played that many games, but he has to go in a digit round. So he's going to go around now. And I think the smarter your league, the more likely he's going to get pushed up, maybe in more casual or more, your hometown league. You might maybe get him more at your price. I also think I might like the secondary second baseman maybe a little bit more than you. A Gleyber Torres I'm fine with. Brendan Donovan qualifies at a bunch of different positions. I think he'll get 600 bats in Seattle. I'm finding some maybe more guys in the second half of drafts that I don't mind at that position. So I don't think I'm quite – you mentioned taking Chisholm. I think I would immediately slot him at third base over second base. I think third base is more of a problem spot. Yeah,
it's funny. I'm like trying to do that right now, but I guess maybe Yahoo will do it for me if I draft a second baseman. Who knows? We'll see. But yes, there are some second basemen coming up that I don't know that I would take one with this pick right now that I'm going to have at the end of the 10th round. But I think there's some second basemen late that have played their way onto my radar. And so I kind of agree that I don't think I don't need to force it. If there's somebody at the start of the draft, sure, by all means, like I'll take a Jazz Chisholm, I'll take a Ketel Marte if it fits, but I'm not moving up Ketel Marte like into the top 20 picks just because I need a second baseman. I think there are options late. And so I'm kind of happy to wait on that a little bit. We have to talk about the big pick in this round. Pick 111 overall. Pat Daugherty takes Connor Griffin. James, is this too early? Is Connor Griffin breaking camp with the Pirates? Even if he does as a 19-year-old with very little AA experience, is this too early for Connor Griffin?
I mean, the way the rumor mill is swirling right now and Connor Griffin's status for opening day is like getting near a tabloid level. It's kind of unbelievable where the recent report that's come out of a Pittsburgh radio station is that there's a handshake under the table agreement that Connor Griffin's going to sign right after opening day so he can make the opening day roster. The Pirates can get credit for a PPI pick this year if he wins the Rookie of the Year, but then he's for sure on the team. It's kind of, again, it's like, it's tabloidy. It's a little bit ridiculous right now. It's probably a little bit too early for my liking, especially because Willy Adames was sitting right there. And I know the 90th percentile outcome for Connor Griffin's amazing, but what's the 50th percentile outcome? A 240 batting average, 25 home runs, and 30 stolen bases. That to me sounds a lot like Willy Adames, who's done it a lot longer and a lot more consistently than, of course, Connor Griffin. Even a guy like Jeremy Pena, I considered both of them at the wheel on my pick. But it seemed like the shortstops were a little too safe and secure to do Connor Griffin yet.
We should note that the report as of today out of Houston is that opening day has not been ruled out for Jeremy Pena. He has a fracture on the ring finger of his throwing hand. He has already been throwing, like doing fielding drills, throwing across the diamond. He's going to hit at some point this weekend. And then provided, your ring finger on your top hand as a hitter is not of crucial importance to like your swing path. You just want to make sure that it can withstand the force of the contact and that you're not altering your swing to try and hide discomfort. So it's just going to be a pain tolerance thing for Pena at this point. And it seems like even if he doesn't start the season with the Astros, you're looking at maybe 2 weeks on the IL to start the year, and then he's back. So Pena, Willy Adames is somebody who seems to always get overlooked at shortstop. And I guess I don't know. I was going to say, I guess I get it, but maybe I don't get it.
Let me ask you this about Griffin. Okay. If your thing is trying to be early on the hot prospect, but maybe Griffin's getting a little too pricey for you, why not just take Kevin McGonigal several rounds later?
Well, don't tell people that now, Scott, because he's in my queue.
Yes, he's in everybody's queue. He's in everybody's queue.
Me too.
Yeah. I think that's a really good point. I think Kevin McGonigal, to me at this point, feels like a better bet to break camp with the Tigers than Griffin. He has
number two prospect in baseball
record.
Maybe he's not Griffin's upside, but he can't be that far off that.
Right. And also, let's go down another tier. Like, we know JJ Weatherholt is starting for the Cardinals. They've all but said it. And yeah, he might have the lowest ceiling of the three, but he is still a very impactful prospect. And if you're looking for guys that are going to get those at bats, like I like it. I would wait and take McGonigal or even take Weatherholt. You mentioned Connor Griffin's price going up. I think I heard James under his breath in the middle of the 10th round say Griffin Jacks.
He was in my queue. I was about to jump ADP by 40 spots, and I got sniped on that.
Well, so listen. This is in the 10th round. This is still the 10th round, people, right? Of a 12-team league. So we're talking about the picks heading into pick 120. We're still looking at like pick 115, 116, 117. We had Carlos Estevez go despite having a terrible spring training with his velocity way down. We had Griffin Jacks go, and we had Emilio Pagan go. So when we talk about closers are flying off, we mean even this tier. And I will say, like, Griffin Jacks is very good. Tampa Bay likes to platoon closers a little bit. It took them a while to make Fairbanks just the guy. And even when Fairbanks was just the guy, he was like 75% the guy. And they have Garrett Clevenger, who they really like as a left-handed reliever, but also Edwin Uceta, who had that shoulder, the cranky, quote unquote, cranky shoulder, is already back and throwing, had no structural issues with his shoulder. And they're now saying he may only be delayed like 2 or 3 weeks. So if Edwin Uceta is back in the Rays bullpen by the end of April, is Griffin Jax the full-time closer, or is this right back to a committee by May, and a committee with a left-handed option in that bullpen? And so I find it hard to get super excited about Griffin Jax now that Uceta's injury is not as serious as we maybe had thought.
I wrote about this last week. 3 times in the last 6 weeks, I've run an ADP report for us over here at Rotoworld, where I've gone through 2 weeks of ADP data and just seen who've been the biggest risers week over week. Over the last 2 weeks, as of last Friday, Griffin Jax, Ryan Walker, Dennis Santana, Jeff Hoffman, Abney Uribe, Daniel Plencia, Ryan Helsley, Devin Williams, and David Bednar have all seen their ADP on the NFBC climb at least 10 spots. Those were 9 of the 15 biggest risers among players already inside the top 200 over a 1-week span. 9 of them were relief pitchers. I think just as we get closer to the season, people get more and more afraid of how scarce saves can be, and that panic begins to ensue. But at the same time, like, there's too many good, reliable players on the board. Again, like I mentioned it before, like I just took Willy Adames, who I think is going to 25 home runs and steal 15 or 20 bags. Like that is what? I was ready to jump ADP and take Matt McClain. There you go.
Baseman here. Yahoo has him ranked like 250th. Obviously, this is prior to him looking healthy in spring training. He just went 143rd to Dave Shovein. And I was also going to take Drew Rasmussen as my 4th starting pitcher, and then DJ took him.
I missed Raz.
But I'll let you finish, and then I'll ask you a question about another player.
I was going to say, I actually have Raz rated ahead of Bubba Chandler, who I took on my turn. I missed him on the board because he's ranked so low to death. That was a bad miss by me. But Scott, I wanted to ask you, Tatsuya Imai over there. Walk us through that pick and the thoughts around it.
You know what? I know we're not playing this league out, but it's a FOMO pick. I haven't gotten a share of him yet. And so many Japanese pitchers have come over here and been impactful right away, right? I mean, go back to Hideo Nomo, Iwakuma. I think he could be. Yamamoto's obviously been great with the Dodgers. I think he could be the next in that line. And Houston generally has a plus defense. I'm not going to go this month without drafting that guy at least once, even if it's in a mock draft.
I get that. I like Imai. I have him. I almost said Yamamoto because you were talking about Yamamoto. I have Imai like 32nd in my rankings. I went with Sandy Alcantara here on the turn. I have Drew Rasmussen 1 spot ahead of him. I was just on Sleeper in the Bus with Paul Sporer and Justin Mason and those guys yesterday. And we were all kind of effusive in our praise of Alcantara. But, I wrote an article over on NBC Sports last week on bounceback starting pitchers, with which people can check out. In the last 12 starts of last year, Sandy Alcantara had a 3.13 ERA, a 0.99 WHIP, and yes, the strikeout rate was only 22%. But all year, the argument was, hey, it takes a little while for command to come back after Tommy John surgery. People expected it to come back for him in May and June. It didn't come back for him until like August or end of July, but it came back. And he threw 175 innings in his first year back from Tommy John. So the argument for me on why Sandy Alcantara was always fantasy viable was he's got good ratios. He's going to throw a lot of innings. So even though his strikeout rate is never high, his strikeouts overall are fine because he throws 180, 190 innings. And maybe that's not an ace, but it's, a pretty good SP2, SP3. And I think that's who he is now. And people are avoiding him in drafts. And then you add to the fact that he split his slider into kind of like a sweeper and a cutter. And the cutter looks pretty good in spring training. And I don't know if it'll stick. It's a new pitch. But I just think even if he's just good old-fashioned solid ratios, 180 plus innings, Sandy Alcantara, getting him as my SP3, SP4 feels really good.
For might be on a better
firm
team
agree.
by the middle of the year too.
Yeah. Scott, I got to ask you, you rounded out the closers. Again, we've been talking about closers a lot here, but we're going to end talking about closers because I think there's nobody left to really talk about. You took Dennis Santana. I had, just in round 13, we had Josh Hader, Dennis Santana, Kenley Jansen, and we also had Trevor McGill. So Scott, talk to me about Dennis Santana, and do you feel confident enough in him? And then also just talk to me in general about Hader and McGill, who were, in this range as well, their injuries. Would you feel comfortable drafting them in the 13th round of a 12-team league?
I was in an auction last night, salary cap draft, and Hader went for $4. And honestly, I was okay. I didn't get him, and I was fine with it. You guys, I think, are maybe more willing to take a risk on hurt players, especially a hurt pitcher, than I am this time of year. Those are guys I'm running away from. With Santana, I think Pittsburgh will be mildly improved, and I think he's the unquestioned guy in the 9th inning. I think he has an easy path to 25 to 30 saves. Pagan is the closer I'd rather have in this tier, and he went a little bit earlier in this draft than he might go in some other drafts. I think he's a perfect closer too, but had no problem downshifting to Santana. And again, I'm trying not to draft into red ink at this time of the year, with the exception that when we get to the bottom third of the draft, okay, that's when I'll try a Garrett Cole or something like that. But I really don't want to do anything like that with maybe the first 2/3 of my selections.
Yeah, I'm with you on. I have deviated from drafting in pitchers who are currently injured. I no longer am a huge fan of that. Not that I was a huge fan before, but I don't like to do it. And those two guys worry me, and I would not be drafting them in a lot of places. Pitchers coming off of injuries, if I've seen them back on the mound at the end of last season, I feel a little bit more comfortable with taking them.
I'll admit I'm a little scarred that last year in a key league of mine where I have a co-manager, we were between Kirby and Wu. We had a long debate. And when you co-manage, you have to let the other guy make the pick sometimes. So he didn't like Wu as much as I did. So we took Kirby, and for 6 months, it drove me crazy. Yeah.
We finally saw Kevin McGonigal off the board here in the 14th round, pick 163. So we had referenced him early. He did come off the board. I should say, on the closer note, we also just had Brian Abreu come off the board in the 14th round. He figures to start the season as the closer for the Astros. But yeah, who knows how long that lasts. James, you are about to pick, but I want to ask you, Munetaka Murakami went at the top of the 14th round here, pick 159 to Pat. Where are you at on Murakami? And I will, lump in Okamoto as well, because they're both coming over from the MPB and they're both corner infielders. Are you okay with Murakami at this price? Are you avoiding him in general?
I think at this price, I would slightly avoid. I'd kind of need to make very certain that my batting average floor was significantly higher before drafting Murakami, but also at the same time, on the flip side, if I was desperate for power at this point in the draft, I think he could be one of the cheapest 40 homer bats we've seen in a very long time. Like, the top end is that good. The low end, again, is like a 200 batting average. I think somewhere in between there is probably where this all winds up, but there's a lot of exciting intrigue with Murakami, and I'm more so excited to see how it winds up from the sidelines rather than wanting to make the pick to see if it's going to be on my watch.
We also saw Weatherholt finally go, so all three of these guys have gone in this round. Scott, I want to ask you, Abner Uribe goes now in round 15. Just another closer who's not a full closer, but we're just going to do this. This is what's going to happen with closers. Scott, you took Gleyber Torres. You had mentioned liking the second base pool deep. You did not take Jackson Holliday, who went 2 picks later. I want you to talk a little bit about your Gleyber Torres pick, but also Jackson Holliday, former number 1 overall pick, former top prospect, coming off the hamate injury. Like, is this somebody you would have even considered at that spot? And why not, or why'd you go the other direction?
Yeah, if it just wasn't for the hamate injury, which of course was the injury du jour about 4 or 5 weeks ago, because he's a perfect post-type sleeper, right? And who's the number 1 overall prospect in baseball. He came up early, he struggled, and then these guys get discounted, sometimes even forgotten about in a more casual league, and then you swoop in and you get those guys. We love post-type players, but again, it's just a case of me not wanting to draft into the red ink. And with Torres, again, it's a very boring veteran. Will hit for a plus average. He has good plate discipline skills, which means he'll probably bat second in a Detroit lineup that I think at least is, maybe it's a little top heavy, but I like the first 5 or 6 guys in that lineup. I think Torres is just an underappreciated player. He's still in his 20s, right? It seems like he's been around so long. He should be like 35 years old right now, but I still think he has a lot to offer us as a fantasy player, as a boring veteran.
Yeah. James, you took one of my favorite young hitters. Talk to me about Sal Stewart. What are your expectations for him? You took him pick 181, so it feels like a pretty solid cost for, we were talking about all these other rookie hitters who haven't even debuted, who are going, 30 picks higher, 20, 30 picks higher, when Sal Stewart is also a very good prospect and has hit at the major league level already.
Tremendous prospect. I can always tell when you're writing the Rotoworld news reports about Sal Stewart, because I'm like, oh, there's Eric. He loves Sal Stewart. But I think that if he was a little bit more of a classic baseball looking player, he might have a lot more hype. I think the fact that he's like a little chubby, doesn't have a defensive position, kind of scruffy, his incredible, sensational batted ball day there from the minor leagues and the major leagues as a 20 and 21-year-old flies very, very, very under the radar. We know how advantageous that Cincinnati ballpark can be to hit. It seems like he has a starting spot some days in spring training. Some days it seems like he still might have to fight for it. But he's ripped the cover off the ball all spring. I don't really know how this Reds team could have watched him at the end of the year last year, seen him this spring, and seen their other options and spots in their lineup, and not give him a job. And if he can even steal 10 bases, there's a 30-homer upside. I think he's one of the best bargain picks for a corner infielder. And I was really, really excited to get him where I just did.
Yeah, I'm obviously a big fan of Sal Stewart. Scott, you took a polarizing pitcher, Andrew Abbott. Just talk to me in general about Abbott, what you like about him or don't, and how you feel about your staff right now.
I feel like I'm the only guy who likes Andrew Abbott. Look, I get it. He's outpitched his expected ERA like 2 or 3 years in a row. He pitches in Cincinnati. He's got a high fly ball rate. The fly ball rate is what people don't understand. The idea is to exert your will on your outcomes. Now, if it were a high ground ball rate, we'd all love it. But when you are getting a high fly ball rate, that means you're actually getting the outcome that you want. Most fly balls turn into fly ball outs, as long as you're not absolutely horrible with home runs, and Abbott hasn't been. I think the park is a little bit overrated as a place that's going to get you torched. It's not like he's pitching in Colorado or something like that. So when you've beaten your expected like 2 or 3 years in a row, like Abbott has, I just wonder if maybe it's part of his profile. It's like you see some of these pitchers every year, right? It used to be Dave Bush was this guy. It's like, oh wow, well he's been unlucky with ERA like 5 of the last 6 years. Like maybe that's who he is. Andrew Abbott to me has been 3 or 4 rounds mispriced all spring.
I have Abbott around like my top 40 starting pitchers. So I would agree with you. I think, there's some issues or concerns, I should say, with the home ballpark, obviously. Those are some things that I think are relatively valid. But he's a really solid starting pitcher. And let's see, we finally saw Blake Snell go. Round 16 here, pick 185. James, I just want to ask you, since you are about to come up, so whatever. I'm still going to ask you, James. You're going to multitask. At this cost, 185 for Blake Snell in what would be an IL league. How do you feel about that? And if you're in a non-IL league, like an NFBC format, are you drafting Blake Snell at all?
If I was in a non-IL league, I'd be a little bit afraid of that spot for Blake Snell, truthfully, just because, are you okay with getting 100 innings from a pitcher in that spot? At that spot, with Blake Snell's effectiveness per inning, likely, probably are, but you still don't feel superb about it. And I think that's kind of where we kind of just are with Blake Snell. Like, I think I had the option to take him there. I took Gavin Williams instead, who I think won't be as good, but I think he's a good chance he pitches more. And I think that's kind of just the decision you have to make at the spot in the draft. I don't know. Blake Snell went right before me at that pick, so I didn't even have the option to take Blake Snell.
The Dodgeritis is going to kick in. By the way, I love the pick. You took Brian Reynolds, who I think is a great bounce back candidate, now going outside the top 200 in this draft, James. I think that's another reason why I don't think you have to panic if your outfield doesn't fill up right away, because you can get guys like that.
Yeah, he was the last on that tier for me. I was really nervous to get him with this pick.
I thought about Brian Reynolds because this is a mock. I went with Dylan Cruz at the end of round 16, dreaming on the upside. But, if I'm really going through with like my build currently and like where I have some risk and where I need some boring value, I think that Brian Reynolds probably would have been my pick normally. I think he was in my bounce back hitters article, which everybody can check out over on NBC Sports. I really think that there is a solid amount of potential bounce back for him here. Speaking of bounce back, I am going to take Adley Rutschman as my catcher here at the end of the 18th round. I talked about this a lot last year. The batted ball data for Rutschman was not really any different than we've seen from him in his career. Still makes tremendous swing decisions, lots of contact, hits the ball hard enough. He should not have performed as poorly as he did last year. No, he may never turn out to be the superstar that we thought that he was going to be when he was coming up, but I think he's going to be a really solid starting catcher. I don't think Basayo is going to catch all that much, and he'll DH a lot, and so I'm not worried about Rutschman's playing time. I'm happy to take him here just a few rounds before the end of this draft.
Doesn't it scare you that he reminds you so much of Matt Wieters, though? They're having the exact same career arc.
No, it doesn't scare me a ton. I'm okay with it. And then I also just took Robert Suarez here in the 19th round. We don't have bench spots, right? So we have to draft a full starting lineup before the end of this. So I'm going to take a reliever here because I only have one. Suarez is somebody where, I think he's a really talented pitcher. Raisel Iglesias has wobbled in the past. I think that Raisel Iglesias is the closer. They have said he's the closer. But I don't think the leash is particularly long on a team that is desperate to get back to the postseason. The Braves have had some real tough luck. And I think that if Raisel Iglesias has a rough start to the year, I don't think they'll hesitate to go to Suarez.
That's how I feel about Luke Weaver in New York, right? If
so
Devin
Suarez
Williams
can't find his
way, you should have a list of 7 or 8 guys who fit this profile.
Yeah, I think for me, it's guys who are worst case scenario, I'm getting solid ratios and maybe some cheap wins. And best case scenario, I'm also getting 10 to 15 saves. And so for me, I'm taking a guy like that well over being what are the Cardinals going to do in their bullpen? What are the Athletics going to do in their bullpen? What are the Rockies going to do in their bullpen? You can have that. I'm not going to worry
draft
about
the
that.
skills, not the roles. That's what Ron Chandler told us many years
ago.
Yeah,
especially when you're at this point. I agree. Draft the skills, not the roles when you're at this point in the draft, because I just don't. I don't want to take a closer just because he's a closer. There are some guys on the Cardinals that I would consider taking, but not over a guy like Suarez. We're coming down to it here a little bit. James took Robert Garcia, who was it was between him and Suarez for me. I think Robert Garcia is probably the closer for the Rangers. Scott, you took Riley O'Brien. I will say, when I said there are some guys on the Cardinals that are interesting, he's one of them. I don't know if he's the closer, but he's one where I'm okay taking a gamble. I'm okay taking a gamble on Robert Garcia. I liked your Caballero pick, James, because I think he's going to get a lot of playing time and steal bases. Caleb Durbin went a couple picks before you. Caleb Durbin in Yahoo has second base and third base eligibility. The move to Boston should be good for the batting average. And he's going to steal a lot of bases. Jordan Lawler, 224. He has third base, middle infield eligibility. He's going to pick up outfield eligibility. People forget, this was a former top 5 prospect in all of baseball who's hitting the cover off the ball in spring and is going to start for the Diamondbacks. I'm fully in on Jordan Lawler this year. I don't know, Scott, if you think that I'm being overly optimistic, but I have a lot of shares of Jordan Lawler.
We talk about post-type sleepers, right? I mean, he was a big deal. And then in the meantime, Perdomo became better than what they expected. They extend him. He kind of locks down shortstop, and they told Lawler he has to find another position. But man, he's still in his young 20s and still could be a regular all-star by the time he's 27, 28 years old.
James, talk to me in this range of hey, we're in round 18, 19, 20, and you have a lot of guys who maybe don't have locked in starting jobs or unquestionable skills, but you've got Owen Casey in round 20. You've got your boy Brett Beatty in round 20. Talk to me about Brett Beatty, because I think he's probably worst case scenario, the strong side platoon at DH with the potential to get starts at other places. His season last year was good, and the batted ball quality is really good. I think we should be treating Brett Baty like a good, nearly everyday player.
The thing that's funny about Baty is that his archetype of player doesn't often lend itself to the utility man title. Like the fact that he had to prove himself a lot as a defensive player. Now he's gotten to that point and done so. He's not like usually utility players, like we said before, more like the Caballeros. These are base stealers, defenders first. Like Brett Baty last year, the power production was very real. The bat speed is near the top of the league. And he's definitely the best defender on the Mets roster at third base, probably still right now. So I think that's going to be something that we have to figure out over the course of the season, but he's a fun target for me late in drafts because especially that gold mine of second base, third base eligibility.
Breaking news.
I'm going to cut you off very quickly because Yahoo's going to kick us out of here in 10 minutes and 45 seconds. But I want us each to get a chance to talk about our team. So Scott, we're going to pull up your team real quick. I want you to just talk about your team in general, how you think it came together, if there was any kind of strategy that you would do differently now that it's all said and done.
Yeah, I prioritize home runs at the expense of stolen bases. I think that's something you can find in season, but I would like a more balanced build and maybe just one more starting pitcher I felt really good about. I don't dislike my team. Now, one of the things I'm always doing, I didn't do it as much in this mock because we were talking and stuff like that, but the standings tab. And people say, well, I don't care about projections and all that. I think you should be constantly looking at the projected standings tab, which Eric, by the way, I was going to say breaking news.
I was going to say, yeah, let's bring up that.
Eric has won the standings. But why do we care about that? Because it helps you figure out, am I on pace with home runs? Am I on pace with stolen bases? Am I on pace with saves or strikeouts or whatever it is? And the two categories I'm most likely to be okay with not being that great in, lesser to an extent batting average, but certainly ERA and WHIP, because there's so much. I mean, I don't want my ERA and WHIP to be terrible, but if I'm a little bit behind on those categories, but I like my pitching staff, there's so much volatility. You're more likely to outkick. If you don't draft speed, you're not going to have speed. If you don't draft power, you're not going to have power. You could draft a team projected to finish ninth in ERA or WHIP and still end up being good in those categories, especially because pitching has so much volatility to it. So I don't take those projections as seriously in those columns. But just make sure you're checking on the standings tab to make sure it's kind of getting your alignment check for your car.
James, what did you think about your squad?
I think that I oversold on power early and then just forgot about it late. Looking at the projected standings tab right now, I'm one of the weaker teams in terms of power, which I'm surprised about based on the start of my draft. But then realizing I went very speed heavy late makes a lot of sense. I like the fact that I got to bank on a hero pitcher build and hero relief pitcher build to then kind of take my shots and just simply the guys I liked or the guys that fell to me as we moved down the board, took a lot of risks and did some wild things, but that's what mock drafts are for, to kind of see how things fit together. But still overall, definitely like the team, but definitely could have made, looking back, there's always some things like, I wish I would have done that, wish I would have done that as you move down the board and you look back on it.
Yeah, I like your team. I like a lot of the picks that you made. I kind of feel like, listen, I know that the mock draft gods have said that I am projected first. There's some things that I would take back as well on my team. I mentioned during the draft, I don't have a problem with Bryce Harper. I'm not avoiding Bryce Harper, but I think first base is, especially in a 12-team league, is particularly deep. And so where you have to draft Bryce Harper, I might just wait and take Pasquantino, take, Tyler Soderstrom I like, Michael Busch I like. Like there are guys you could wait and grab and go for some other places. I like Helsley. I think I was able to kind of, pivot when I missed some of those relief pitcher targets at first. But like my three relievers are Ryan Helsley, Robert Suarez, and Paul Sewald. Yes, Paul Sewald may start the year closing for the Diamondbacks, but there's also a really strong likelihood that, like, if Raisel Iglesias looks good at the start of the season, I am actively eyes on the waiver wire for the first few weeks of the season, really trying to find a closer, which is a spot I'd rather not be in. I feel really good about waiting on starting pitching and getting Cole Reagans, Joe Ryan, Ryan Pepio, Sandy Alcantara, Shota Imanaga. I really like my staff. They're guys that I have in a lot of places. And then I would just say, like, for me personally, my build is a little more volatile. than I would normally have, like a Jazz Chisholm, Randy Rosarena, O'Neal Cruz, Dylan Cruz. Like I probably would have tried for some of those picks to be something a little bit safer, because I have no problem leaning into some volatility, but I think you just have to pick and choose your spots. And I like O'Neal Cruz this year. I think he, a lot of what we saw from him in the batted ball data last year is very similar to what he's done in his career. And so, maybe he's a 230 hitter again, which we've seen in the past. And if you're a 230 hitter, but you're hitting 20 plus homers and stealing 30 plus bases, that can still be really valuable. But you put that player on a team with Jazz Chisholm, and then you're just kind of like, maybe you're doubling down a little too much on the volatility and that type of build. And that's something that, we have to consider as we.
Man, I love the way the pitching fell for you. Reagan's in round 5, Ryan in round 6. Those are guys who are going to be hotly contested in all of my leagues. We talked about Alcantara, who I think we all like the setup there. Imanaga just came off a really good spring outing. I think, what do you care about in spring? It's walks and strikeouts like anything else. And again, anybody in front of that Chicago defense, which is airtight, looks really good to me. I think you're going to have to be lucky with saves or, run well there because you didn't prioritize it. But I love your starting. I thought you sometimes the draft just falls where the guys make sense when you pick and you don't have to reach for them. A lot of times I don't like picking on the end because it kind of, I feel like I draft better when I'm closer to my picks at all times. But I think the draft fell really well for you, or you executed it really well in the one spot.
I agree with you on picking on the ends. I don't usually like it, but it's easier for this, and we're going to go with it. So we're gonna wrap it up. But before we do, it's obviously a busy draft weekend for people. Opening day is on Thursday, and you can check out opening games on NBC and Peacock. We have 2 games. We got the Mets and the Pirates. Skeens, Peralta. That's going to be a great one. And then the night game there, we got the Diamondbacks and the Dodgers. That's going to be a lot of fun. Yamamoto on the mound, and then the Diamondbacks potentially with Jordan Lawler in the lineup. Just going to have some young, fun players there as well. But I'm going to have each of you just kind of like wrap up by, what are some things that you think should be top of people's mind as they head into their drafts this weekend? What are some pieces of advice you have, or what are some things that you think people need to do between now and the weekend to set themselves up for the most success? And I'll start with you, James.
I mean, the big thing is always keeping track of player injuries, roles, spring training lineups. Great spot to do that, of course, is the Rotoworld player news page. The fact that you just said that this morning, we get an update that Jeremy Pena might be in line for opening day. We keep getting more news about the Handmade Bone crew, Francisco Lindor, Corbin Carroll, like we spoke about at the top, making sure you're the most up-to-date on current information. So, if you can get that tiny little bit of edge in ADP over your league mates, can make all the difference by the end of the season.
And Scott, what about you?
Ask yourself, what can I get inexpensively in my league? And you're almost like drafting with a plan upside down, and then that tells you what you're going to do with your early picks. I also want to say thanks to Peacock for getting me through the winter with Big Ten basketball and the PGA Tour, and then I have baseball coverage coming. It's a great time. Not to mention, anytime you want to watch The Office or anything like that, it's a great time to subscribe to Peacock.
And the Olympics in there.
Oh, for sure. Well, I mean, look, all these international events, right? We have the Ryder Cup, awesome. Olympic hockey, awesome. We just had the WBC, fantastic. We have the World Cup coming later this year. It's just a really fun time in the sports cycle. I hope baseball doesn't screw up this momentum they have with what might happen after this season. Maybe
we won't talk about the
worry about that. We worry about that.
But ask yourself what you can get cheap and have an opinion on the second tier of closers, right? Eric went cheaper on closers. I went cheaper on closers. I don't think you want to tap that position. I don't think you want to beat everybody to that position. If you do, Kate Smith is a guy I like a lot. But look in that closer 7 to closer 14 range and try to identify a couple of guys you can live with.
I'm going to share my thoughts, but I want to let you know, I'm going to throw it back to you guys to give just a couple of names of players you like to be targeting in your drafts. Give some of the viewers and listeners some players that have kind of risen up your boards or guys that you're interested in drafting. I say a thing that really helps me for prep. I don't prep out every single round of my draft, but I like to know in general where I'm drafting, who tends to go in the vicinity of those picks, at least in like the first 10 or so rounds of my draft. And I like to map out a general strategy that's comfortable to me. So like based on where I'm picking, if I pick first, like I did in here, where's my cutoff for drafting a starting pitcher, right? Where do I say, hey, if I don't have a starting pitcher by here, I'm probably in big trouble. And maybe I'm not saying I'm taking an outfielder, I'm taking a shortstop, I'm taking a third baseman, but I'm saying I'm taking hitters. By this point, I need to have a starting pitcher. By this point, I need to have 2 starting pitchers, or by this point, I need to have a closer. If I don't have a catcher by here, I'm just going to wait another 8 rounds. It's having a general idea of who's available in your league when, based on when you're picking. And so you're not fully adapting on the fly. You're reading the room. You're making adjustments based on what the room is doing, but you're not having to like make up your strategy as you're going. To me, that's a crucial thing. I'll leave off with some players that I have been targeting. I already mentioned, I have a lot of shares of Sandy Alcantara, Tetsuya Imai, Edward Cabrera. There's like a whole range of guys that I think are going like starting pitcher, 3, 4, 5 for me. Pepio, Rasmussen. I really like leaving drafts with those guys. I haven't gotten Matt McClain because everybody is raising Matt McClain up their boards, but I kind of like waiting on second baseman and getting Ozzy Albies or Matt McClain. I think those guys are due for bounce back seasons. I'm big on the bounce back of Jake Berger. I'm not taking him as my first baseman, but as a corner infielder or a bench bat, I think that Jake Berger is going to have a strong season. And so I like waiting on first base or corner infield. And there's that range that's like Berger, but also Wilson Contreras is in there. And I think that there's a really a solid, and Jordan Lawler, who I mentioned, who goes much later, is somebody that I like to be getting in draft. James, what about you?
Similarly to the first thing you mentioned about when you have to be okay with certain things in certain leagues, it helps to, if you're going to make rankings for yourself, use them in tiers so you know how close a tier is to going, to see how much of urgency you should have with drafting a certain player, a certain position. I think that always helps me a lot when I'm in draft rooms. And also, similar, pitching is always the greatest conundrum in fantasy baseball. There's the most risky position. I think basically, if you look at the top 30 right now, half of them are going to spend time on the injured list this year, if not just for 2 weeks, if for much more than that. Choose the guys who you think are going to be the ones that are just better than expected, simply. Like a guy like Yuri Perez, most leagues being drafted as an SP3, SP4. If you're comfortable with him as your SP2 or SP1, that's a target. Same with Ryan Pepio. If most leagues he's an SP3, but you like him as SP2, you can wait and kind of shoehorn him into that spot. And then as far as sleepers or breakouts, I love Braxton Ashcraft. I'm really into what Mick Abel and Kyle Harrison are both doing this spring. I really like Owen Casey on the Marlins. I think he's been making a lot of improvements in plain sight the last few years, and he's ready to explode, similar to Francisco Alvarez, Samuel Basayo, Cole Young, just interesting young players who have a shot to make a big impact this season.
Scott, what about you? Who are some players you're targeting?
Yeah, I asked myself, what teams do I like? What programs do I like? What front offices do I like? And the team I keep coming back to is the Milwaukee Brewers, who have become what the Rays used to be. We don't have as much money. We're not at that big of a market, but we're going to spend our money smarter than everybody else does. Very good defensive team. They're good at a lot of subtle things. So you get maybe a boring veteran like Christian Yelich. You get a upside pitcher like Jacob Mizorowski. If Logan Henderson is healthy, I took him late in this draft. I realize he does have some red ink, but that's late in the draft. I think he has a high upside. Maybe even after Uribe not drafted as a primary closer, he could be their guy. I believe what Bryce Terang became in the second half of last year is sustainable. So I'm going to draft a lot of guys there. And then, when in doubt, it never hurts to take a pitcher in the parks that we like Seattle, like Miami. We talked a lot about the Marlins staff. Really, anybody in the Seattle staff, 1 to 5, is interesting to me. Remember, Brian Wu a couple of years ago was their number 5. So a lot of times I'm drafting ballparks, defenses, organizations, even the Red Sox. I know they pitch in Fenway, but a lot of cutters on that staff. They've made guys better. Brian Bello took a nice step forward last year. I'm not sure if he got drafted in this league, but he's somebody who'd be a great late round pick. So a lot of times I'm drafting into mindsets, organizations, and which teams do I trust?
Love all that advice. You'll get a lot more advice and content from Scott this year. Over on Yahoo, you can follow him on Twitter at Scott_Pianowski. James, you can follow on social medias at James_Schiano. You got a couple weekly columns again this year, James?
Yep. So I think every week you and I are going to tag team waiver wire stuff. I'm going to be doing a stolen base column like I did last year, tracking stolen base trends around the league, looking more at team defenses and catcher pitcher tandems more so than just who's running. We're kind of trying to find why people are running and who's going to run next. But that's all that's firmly on the schedule this year, along with our Q&A on Mondays.
Yeah, Scott, do you have any specific weekly stuff people can look out for?
Yeah, I'll be doing a lot of reactions to what happened the previous night. We were talking about pickups. I'll be doing power rankings. I'll be doing shuffle ups, which is a new ranking of all the positions as if we were starting a draft that night. So I don't have the exact budget in front of me. Some of the things will be more rotational. Some of them will be things that I'm doing every week, but I'll be giving you baseball content 3 or 4 times a week. And of course, social media about 22 hours a day.
Love it. As James mentioned, we will do our fantasy baseball Q&As Mondays. We're doing that around lunchtime. Next week, it may be Tuesday or Wednesday, with opening day being Thursday, so we can get as much info as possible for opening day. But rest assured that James or I and the Rotoworld's account will tweet that out so you know exactly when the Q&A is for next week, and then we'll get into a regular Monday cadence. On Mondays during the season, I'm going to have a streaming starting pitcher article that will just kind of like rank some of the streaming starters for the week. And then at the bottom of that, I'm going to go back to doing my pitch mix analysis that I was doing for the last few years, instead of having just a standalone column of that that's going to be embedded in a streaming starting pitcher thing. On Wednesdays, we're going to do a little bit of an MLB roundup, which is going to be fantasy relevant, but also just going to have some news and notes from around the league, which will be just good for baseball fandom, and then also hopefully good for your fantasy news. And then as James mentioned, on Friday, I'm going to publish a waiver wire article every week, and then James is going to update it as the weekend goes on, so that Sunday when waiver wires run, you've got everything up to date, making sure that nothing that was published on Friday is outdated, or anybody who kind of emerged over the weekend is on there as well. So we'll be tag teaming that for you. And then obviously just keep it locked to Rotoworld, the player news, which is up and embedded in Yahoo as well. You'll probably see James and my faces pop up a bunch in your Yahoo app when our MLB videos come up there. So we'll be doing those videos as well. So use all that Yahoo stuff. Check out Scott's articles, check out James's and mine, and follow us all on social media. I am at Samulski NYC. And yeah, we're excited for baseball season. Excited that everybody was here. Enjoy this final week until MLB opening.